I'm James Barfield with Your Urban Connection. Remember, this is the channel that is often imitated, but is never duplicated. Now, let me say that this show is going to be one that's going to be very interesting. You see, in the era that we find ourselves in, and I call it the era of cleanliness, several GOP members, including governors, a congressman, and a state legislature, to be sure, are all competing to see who can be the biggest clown of all. Now, among those competing are Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, Governor Huckabee Sanders of Arkansas, and last but not least, Governor Gregg Abbott of Texas. And tonight I want to talk in particular about the latest act of clownery that is being conducted and carried out by the latter, Governor Gregg Abbott. And here's the deal. There was a Black Lives Matter protest against police brutality in Austin, Texas in 2022, I believe it was. And a white male driving a motor vehicle, I believe he was driving for Uber at the time, used his motor vehicle to run a stop sign and plow into a group of protesters at this rally. Now, like I said, this was a Black Lives Matter rally. But don't get it twisted. Not everybody that attends a Black Lives Matter protest happens to be Black. So before you go off on a tangent, I want you to understand that, because the victim here that I'm going to talk about tonight, as a matter of fact, was not Black. He was a white male. So let me give you the story. So these people were protesting peacefully, I might add, in the city of Austin, Texas. The perpetrator here was an Army sergeant, and the Army sergeant happened to be driving, and he happened to come up on this group of protesters. Now, he'd already let the world know how he felt about protesters, not just Black Lives Matter protesters, but protesters. He'd already tweeted that he might kill a few people. Now, so this guy happens to be in, as I said, in Austin, Texas, comes up on this group of protesters, and he runs a red light, accelerates his motor vehicle, and plows into the crowd. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is almost an automatic charge of assault with a deadly weapon. This gentleman is using a 3,000 to 4,000 pound motor vehicle as his weapon of choice to plow into some innocent, peaceful, protesting people protesting police brutality. Now, after he does this, there's a gentleman there who's with his fiance, who happens to be in a wheelchair because she was a quadriplegic, and he was pushing her through the protest area. Now, this gentleman also happened to be a licensed gun owner, and he had strapped to his chest an AR-45, or maybe, yeah, an AR. Now, 47, I believe it is, AR-47. So here's what happens. The gentleman politely left his fiance to walk around to this guy to find out what the hell's going on. Same thing as you and I probably would do. He never, ever raised his gun up to aim at the gentleman driving the vehicle. Never did. There are several witnesses that have stated that his gun, the barrel was pointed downward. He never raised it up. He went to the vehicle to talk with the guy to find out what's going on. He never uttered a word. The driver rolled down his window and, without asking any questions, fired about 6 or 7 shots, killing the protester. So now let's move this forward. So the protester is arrested and charged with murder. He was then taken and set for a trial date before a jury of his peers. The trial comes. He's put on trial before 12 jurors. They heard his story, which he chose to say he feared for his life. Are you kidding me? You're driving a 3,000 to 4,000 pound vehicle as an assault weapon into a crowd and you fear for your life? He claims, in his attorney's claim, that this shooting resulted from, if you can believe this, stand your ground law. Okay? Stand your ground. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the 12-person jury fails to buy that story. After listening to all of the evidence from both sides, they failed to buy his and his attorney's story that he feared for his life and that he was a victim of stand your ground. I mean, he was utilizing stand your ground to kill the victim. So they found him guilty of murder. Now, this was last week, ladies and gentlemen. So here enters politician Gregg Abbott, the governor of Texas, interfering with the justice system, the criminal justice system, which is going through the normal process. They found this guy guilty of murder. Now, so the judge does not immediately sentence the man. He sets sentencing for perhaps this week. Well, this week is almost over and it hasn't happened yet. So as we speak here today, the criminal, the felon, I'll say, he's been convicted, but he has not been sentenced. So you have to ask the question, why in the hell is Governor Abbott rushing to give this guy a pardon, a full pardon, stating that Texas has a strong stand your ground law and it is not to be disturbed or overturned by any judge or jury? Excuse me? Governor, you are a governor, but you don't have the authority to issue a pardon. Not without a recommendation from the Board of Pardons and Parole. So he fires off a letter on last Friday. Now listen to this. He fires off a letter after getting pressure from 3 or 4 legislators, Republican legislators there in the state of Texas. And get this, if you will, also he got a letter from, if you can believe this, Kyle Rednorf, or whatever his name is, the young 16 or 17-year-old who killed two, I can't remember, he shot at least 3 protesters in Minnesota a couple years back and got off scot-free. He wrote to the governor saying this guy should be pardoned, for he was standing his ground. Get out of here. Get out of here. Now, let me just tell you what really gets me. The governor, like I said, is using a tactic that was first used by former Attorney General Bill Barr to inject himself from a political standpoint into the criminal justice system, to get some convicted persons, and namely one general that had already pleaded guilty, not once, but twice, to a felony. And Barr, because he was a friend of Donald's, okay, Barr injected himself in to the judicial system and told the judge to not follow through with any penalties and to free this guy. So then we had this intervention with 3 or 4 of friends of Don's. And some were pardoned, some were given clemency, and some did not receive pardons. Now, then move this thing forward, and you have now clown number 2, Jim Jordan, the congressman from Ohio, injecting himself into the indictment of Donald J. Trump on 34 felony counts. And then you have Jim Jordan sending a letter to the DA of Manhattan asking him to come before Congress to talk about why he filed charges against Donald J. Trump. And to his credit, the district attorney politely responded to Jim Jordan, telling him in a very polite way to go to hell. Okay, go to hell. You're not going to intimidate, okay, me and my staff, and you're not going to interfere in this indictment. So now we have Governor Gregg Abbott. Now I want you to listen to this. He cannot wait. And first of all, ladies and gentlemen, one of the requirements for you to even get a pardon in Texas, even if it's recommended by the Board of Pardons and Parole, is the person has to have been sentenced, okay? Has to have been sentenced and been through the entire court process before you can even consider giving him a pardon. Now, let me just say one other thing. To show you how quick this guy is to meddle and interfere in the judicial process, this guy, even though he's been convicted, his attorney has announced that he plans to appeal. So Gregg Abbott cannot even wait for the sentencing or the appeal to take place and go through the normal process. Now, here's the big story on this. I want to repeat this. You know, in Texas, they execute more people than any state in the country. So I want you to take a listen to this. Gregg Abbott, in his 8 years in office, has had countless pardon requests land on his desk. To this date, about 75 or better. You know how many he's pardoned? 8. Now, Many of these people are on death row under controversial circumstances, with new evidence coming forward to show their innocence. They don't get a pass from Governor Abbott. They don't get clemency. They don't get pardon. They don't get a new trial. They don't get any of that from Gregg Abbott. Even in high-profile cases in which Republicans and Democrats alike have desperately called for the governor to spare the lives of death row prisoners, many believe are innocent after years of decades of court scrutiny. Abbott has not used the limited pardon powers he possesses to step in. So why now, Governor Abbott? Why now? This gentleman has been convicted by a jury of his peers who have heard all the evidence. Have you? Have you read the transcript of this trial? Have you looked into any of this? Have you looked at any evidence presented from either side? I think not. Instead, he's deferred to the bedrock of the American legal system. A jury of one's peers determines if someone is guilty of a crime, and appellate courts scour cases for wrongdoings or mistakes. That's what you've always done in the past, Governor Abbott. What makes this case any different? Why not allow it to go through the judicial process? We've always counted on this. Every person that's arrested is assumed innocent until proven guilty. Your man in this case has been proven and found to be guilty, sir. Why do you want to interfere in this? It beats me, except perhaps maybe you have political aspirations to move and run for president, and you're trying to curry favor with some right-wing voters whose help you would need. But that's not good enough, Governor Abbott. Now let's look on, talk a little bit more about what Governor Abbott here has been doing. You know, and like I said, in the one case, the governor is straying from the norm, that of a U.S. Army sergeant found guilty of murdering a man protesting police brutality in Austin, Texas. After a 2-week trial and 17 hours of jurors' deliberation, Daniel Perry was convicted last week in the 2020 shooting of Garrett Foster. So Daniel Perry is this Army sergeant's name. The victim's name was Garrett Foster. Without any indication that the governor reviewed the evidence in the complex case involving self-defense claims and gun rights, Abbott called on the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to hand him a pardon recommendation the day after Perry was convicted. Like I said, Perry has not even been sentenced yet. But yet Governor Abbott is rushing to give him a pardon and hide behind a faulty stand-your-ground law. He says, this is Governor Abbott, and these are his words. He says, I'm working as swiftly as I can, as swiftly as Texas law allows, regarding the pardon of Sergeant Perry. He said this on Twitter on Saturday afternoon. And remember, the trial ended on Friday. He said this on Saturday afternoon after being blasted by hardline conservatives, including firebrand Fox News host Tucker Carlson on Friday night for his lack of immediate response. The surprising call prompted immediate criticisms that the move is a blatant attempt to score political points with the far right by a governor who's contemplating a presidential bid. But it is also a mistakable attempt to extend his power over the judicial system, which he has no authority and no control. And like I said, he cannot on his own issue a pardon without the recommendation of the Pardons and Parole Board. But he's writing them to rush this process up and get me a recommendation for pardon on my desk ASAP. Were you not in the same state of mind, Governor Abbott, when over 75 convicts or people who had been convicted of felony offenses and were sentenced to death row and made appeals to you to give them a pardon or clemency or at least a new trial? Maybe they were innocent. Maybe they were qualified for some of your blessings. But you know what, Governor? You turned a blind eye to 67 of those 75 people. 67 out of 75, Governor. You didn't give them the benefit of the doubt. You didn't give them any favors. You didn't give them the audacity, the respect to even 5 minutes to hear their story. As a matter of fact, you have not given 5 minutes to look at the evidence that was presented in this case in Austin, where a jury sat for 17 hours, Governor, and heard evidence from both sides and come back with a unanimous decision of guilty of murder. And yet, before the ink is dry on the paper, you want to issue a pardon. Governor, you've got a lot of explaining to do. I want to tell you, that in this era of cleanliness, you are right now way out in front of being the biggest clown of them all. Followed very closely behind by the Tennessee State Legislature, the legislative body, which means they're running in good company with you, Governor. I hope you do decide to run for president, so all of Texas can show you what it's like to be disrespected, discourteous, unfair, corrupt, and undeserving of the office of the White House. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's my show for tonight. I hope you all will give a thought to what is going to happen or what might happen, hopefully not what is about to happen, in the state of Texas, where a meddling, interfering governor is sticking his nose where it does not belong. Good night.